Okay.
I even get a little message. That's great.
Okay. So, hello, Dr. Ayala. It's a pleasure to
Hello.
be able to have this conversation with you today. Um, so, my name is Desiree Armas.
Nice to
I
meet you.
Nice to meet you, Dr. Ayala. um, you can call me Des. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a senior. We'll be graduating this coming June, 2021. I'm an environmental studies and anthropology double major, and I'm minoring in social justice. Um, and
I'm gonna be like that, yeah.
Great. Okay. So we already know each other. I have been working for um, the Center for Undocumented Students, which we will get into later, um, for about 2 years. So we already have a relationship. And I just hope we can just have a very casual conversation about your life before St. Peter's, why you came to St. Peter's, why you stayed, and just go over some of your most, memorable moments while being here at the university. So I would like you to say your
Great. I'm glad
name.
to have you be the one to interview me.
Yeah, yes, we already know. So can you still hear me?
Hello? Okay, I can hear you
Okay,
now.
okay.
You wanted me
Um,
to say my name?
okay. So just state your name and then spell it slowly.
And spell it out, my last
Mhm.
name? Okay.
Yeah, your
So
entire name and spell it out.
okay, so my entire name is Jennifer Ayala. And Jennifer, Jennifer, and Ayala, even though it's in English, it sounds like it's with an I, it's Ayala.
Great.
And students call me Ayala.
Yes, yes. So I can call you Ayala during
You
this
can call me
interview.
Ayala. Yeah, you can call me
Ayala.
Ayala. Mhm.
Awesome. So today is June 4th, 2021. And today I will be interviewing you or talking with you, Ayala, Dr. Jennifer Ayala, on your unique experiences here at St. Peter's as an educator and as a director of the Center for Undocumented Students in celebration of the 150th anniversary of St. Peter's University. So now we're going to get into the questions. First question
Sounds good.
is, yeah, first question is, if you can please describe your childhood, your family, and where you grew up before you started working at St. Peter's.
Okay, so this is like a whole life history. So my childhood, I was born in Queens, New York. My family had like recently migrated and met there. My mother from Cuba, my father from Ecuador. And they kind of like met in night school. Um, and from there, we moved to Jersey when I was like in, I guess now it would be considered middle school. It wasn't a thing before middle school. That's kind of a newer concept. And so we moved to different parts of Jersey. I think it was first Lodi, then two different places in Elmwood Park. Um, and so it was a definitely a big shift in environment. Like when in Queens we lived, I remember we lived like underneath like it was a La Doble R at that point. I don't even think that exists now. But it's like an L train or an elevated train. So we lived right underneath that. And so like I remember growing up like hearing like the sounds of the trains moving every like, I don't know, a lot.
Yeah,
Um,
I can relate to that because I live like right there's like well, we call it a bridge, but it's the turnpike.
Mhm. Oh.
And
Mhm.
then the train goes by too, like carrying crude oil and all that kind of stuff,
Mhm.
because we're like a port city. So I grew up in a very noisy environment in the train tracks. When I wonder if, when you had visitors over, if they're like, don't you get bothered by the noise? I don't know. Have they ever
All
asked
the
you
time,
that?
all the time. It would interrupt
Oh my
conversation.
God.
I mean, it's just kind of like, those are really the earlier years where it was there, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, that was always a question. And
Right.
with all the noise, and maybe why, like, some of us are hard of hearing in our family.
Right.
In a literal sense, right? So
Yeah.
anyway, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was this in the 80s, and then by the time you were in Jersey was the 90s?
Oh wow. I was born in 74. So when did I come? Yeah, I guess in the 80s then. Oh my goodness. Now I'm gonna show how bad I am at math. Sometime in the 80s is when we moved to Jersey. But yeah, but
Okay.
like my high school years and stuff like that were all here in Jersey, in Elmwood Park, which used to be called East Patterson. But I guess by the time I got there, they like did the name change.
Mhm.
And so my high school years were there. Um, and yeah, it was definitely a shift. I remember like the first things that I noticed in our when we moved was like the change in. So for example, in New York, like the what's PS 166. I can't believe I still remember the name of my elementary school, and it was like a building with multiple floors,
Mm.
and there was like an outdoor space that was all concrete, and we weren't allowed to run because we could fall and get hurt and scrape knees, which I had plenty of or whatever. And then moving to where we moved to in Jersey in the burbs, I was really surprised to see like all this green space. I'm like, oh, you're allowed to run out here. You're allowed to like do
Mhm.
that kind of stuff. So there were like some things that struck me, and also like the language thing. So I know I've told you this before, but like in my first grade, I was in a bilingual class. I remember my teacher's name was Ms. Garcia. She changed it later. I will never remember her like married name, but it was Ms. Garcia growing up. And so it was like I use this example now even in my classes of like how that early experience of a bilingual classroom was really formative
Mhm.
for me in terms of my relationship to language and appreciating both, because moving into New Jersey, it wasn't in the same way, at least
Mm.
into some of the schools that I went to at first. So then from there, what was your other question? So that was some of my childhood, because that could be like hours of conversation, which, you know, but then let's see, where did we go? Okay, so I guess I went to college at Montclair State. I graduated like high school, like I said, in Elmwood Park. And in Montclair State, I remember it was more of like a thing. I applied to maybe one or two. Maybe that was the only college I applied to. I don't remember. It wasn't like this big I
Mhm.
didn't know that much about it. My family was very supportive of me, like the idea of me going to college, but not um, necessarily knowing all of the ins and outs of how to go about doing that process.
Was it
Um,
expected because your parents had also gone to college?
they hadn't gone to four-year college. They had gone to community college, and then like start, we're working. We lived in
Mm.
like multi-generational household. I lived with like both in Queens. I lived with my parents and grandparents, and then later on had always lived with a grandmother later, and with my other grandmother and my uncle, we lived together. So like we had a lot of like
Mm.
family living together, but we were always in a multi-generational home. But anyway, so like with the schools, yeah, so they hadn't gone to four-year college. So but they knew that this was something that was you're supposed to do when you're here, right? And so my mother would always tell me, that it's really important to go to college for economic independence from men, right? So that kind of thing. But like stuff around like SATs, just like what they've heard of, but didn't really like now from what I understand, there's the Common App and there are these like you're encouraged to apply to like a ton of different colleges and stuff like that. And I didn't know as much how to navigate that process aside from whatever things they might have told me at school. So in
Was
that
it
sense,
was Montclair or college in general, was it more affordable?
oh
Late
yeah,
early 90s, right? So was it more affordable?
yes,
So it was
definitely.
more accessible and something that, well, lower income, middle class, high schoolers, it wasn't like a far off dream. It was something that was a lot more achievable then than today.
I really think so. I know, like the idea of loans and stuff like that, that wasn't really part of the conversation. I got like scholarships and stuff like that to go. So it really, and in general, tuition wasn't that high from what I recall. But with between the scholarships and all that kind of stuff, it really wasn't. It was something that was affordable within our range. I preferred staying close to home, somewhere I could commute to rather than, a lot of. Well, I'm trying to think of in my high school. I don't think that many people went away. Everybody kind of stayed around locally and didn't dorm. I didn't dorm. Um, and at that point in time, because I know sometimes we have colleagues that say, well, that's just the norm now. Everybody has to like take out loans and stuff like that. That's just part of life, kind of like not a ritual. I forget the term, but like it's something like one of the milestones. Yeah, it's something you go away to college and this and that, at least on like TV or something, right? But in that time, and I think before that, there were more grants than loans. But there's been since then much more of a pulling back at the state and federal, well, at the federal levels, I guess, that about like funding education in this way. So that
So
I think that
there's a
it
lot more
moved.
investment for higher
Yes.
education back
I,
then.
f- I feel like there was somehow everything was cheaper and it was grants. There wasn't like as much around loans that I remember. That was like that transitioning was starting to happen, that there was more public divestment from public education, because that was like a state university that I went to. And then, but this shift to privatization and loans then took its place and is why I think how we see this problem that we're seeing today.
So the $1 billion student debt crisis was not something you would see on the news regularly
Right.
decades ago.
No.
Okay.
Not that I remember. No.
Right.
Mm-mm.
I don't think it really peaked until, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit more as we talk about your time at St. Peter's and the students that you interacted with. I'm assuming that didn't really peak until much later. So
As far as my awareness of it,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. Okay, so after Montclair State, um, you graduated, and then just can you tell me a little bit about what steps you took that you finally landed at St. Peter's, and then we can go into St. Peter's after you're done.
Sure. So at Montclair State, when I first so I was starting to say before, then we got into like the whole thing of like, going to college and whatnot, was that I went in not knowing what I wanted to do. I just knew that like college is like something that's expected. You do it as like, for these other reasons, because like to make the family proud and all this kind of stuff, right? But I didn't know what I wanted to do. So, I was like taking the general ed classes, what we call here the core classes, and just like kind of discovering what are some of the things I was working as well while I was, but I only needed at that point a part-time job. So like, but I was always like working, to pay for like supplies and other stuff outside there. I was definitely more privileged in having like a family that was able to support me while I was doing that.
Right.
Yeah, and most of the things like food and all that kind of stuff, I didn't have to work for that kind of thing. Um, and it also helped that like, like there wasn't like much for tuition. There wasn't, but I didn't know. And so I ended up taking, and I went and I used their career counseling services, which I found helpful. I think everybody needs to have some kind of counseling or therapy. And that and through that office is where I was kind of introduced to that, like thinking about what are the things that I wanted to do. Um, and I basically ended up majoring in psychology, not so much through this all this like soul searching about what to do, but I ended up, whenever there was like an extra class that I could take, I ended up taking a psychology class. So I'm like, I have all these classes in psychology, I must like it. This must be something that I want to do. So then I ended up majoring in psychology. I had also taken some classes in anthropology, and I ended up I minored in anthropology, and took some extra classes too on like Spanish translation. So I didn't know what I wanted to do. I like I thought, oh, maybe we'll do this like, Spanish translation. Maybe I'll work for the UN and do things like that. At that time, I was working at at a doctor's office. And one of the things that, wherever it is that I would work, that would always come up. Oh, there's someone that doesn't speak English. Can you translate or whatever? So I'm like, maybe I could do like a career in that. Then I tried what simultaneous translation is like. And I like sucked at it. It was difficult. And, I realized, to do something like that, I'd need more than the two languages. I had taken French too, because I thought that was a pretty language. So in high school and in college, I also took French, and as in addition to the Spanish. But yeah, ultimately I decided not that. I thought about, as you can tell, see this background? Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm into, I don't know if you can tell by looking at this, but I'm into science fiction. I thought at first that meant that, okay, maybe I'll study astronomy. I find these concepts, of cosmology and like questions about the universe and, black holes, wormholes, time, all that kind of stuff. I found that stuff fascinating. I'm like, maybe this means I might like astronomy. So I took like a class in that, and I even ended up doing like a project at the end of my time there, like a research project on it. As much as I loved it, what I realized is that um, I like more like the science fiction and speculative type of stuff than um, than the actual what is involved with being an astrophysicist is a lot of math. Like the daily work is math, and I'm
Yeah.
like, this is not going to happen for me. But anyway, I tried out a lot of different things, and I reached the end, and I'm like, I'm not. Where do I go from here with this? I know my family wanted me to do something that was practical, that could make like like a decent income or whatever. But I decided instead, there was like this to continue in psychology in some way. Um, and I went to this kind of like open house type of thing that CUNY had, and I liked it. I didn't know. It was again the same type of thing. I only applied to like one or two places because I wasn't really sure, but I really found a home in CUNY. Um, at the graduate center. It was like what they now call the program critical psychology. And it kind of always was that, but it had a different name at that point. It was social personality psychology. So I did that doctoral program full time. Um, and, from there, I really, got to learn about and look at things in a more critical fashion than I did in my time at Montclair State. When I was at Montclair State, I did things like lasso and things like that, but I wasn't that involved as a commuter student. I like worked and I went to class, and sometimes I went to lasso things and to the parties, but that was, wasn't as involved until like my graduate school. And so then during, because this is going to be about St. Peter's, it's already half an hour into it. So, so I'm going to skip to that. But there was like some decision points, I guess throughout different like parts of life, there were different decision points for me. And one had to do with like, do I want to, because I was interested in both like education and health aspects of psychology. So health in the sense of like, healing and what are like, and disparities and things around that, right? What are some things around that? And then with education, that was like, so my mentor was Dr. Michelle Fine. And I also had like other folks that were really influential in terms of how I was thinking about things. And I had multiple mentors I had in my time there. And so, I had these two different directions. And there was at one point, like later in my time there, where, I was, I had like two job opportunities. One was something had opened up at St. Peter's, full time. And then something had opened up in a research hospital in the city. So, I had to, because they're very different, right? Like it was like, so this is going to take me to education. This is going to take me to health. So I like thought a lot about that. I ended up clearly going to the one in St. Peter's. Um, and in that, like I said, it was a difficult decision because I had this interest in health too. And if they had this available, I had a concentration in health psychology. If they had it available at the time that I was there, I would have also done an MPH, a master's in public health, because I found the idea of community health really like, important and interesting, and does kind of like connect some of the interests that I have in these areas within social justice. So, and before that, before I went to St. Peter's, I taught at Hunter as part of a graduate teaching fellowship. So that was Hunter College in CUNY. And I had there like one of my best teaching experiences, which is redefining Latina health, body, mind, and spirit. And it was a collaboration with someone from a Latina graduate student who was in the theater arts, and a community like organizer around reproductive health issues. So the three of us co-taught this class, and I really loved that model. We did check-ins as part of the class. Like that's where I learned we do circles. So there was like now like some of the things that we talk about, like it happened, when was this? This is, I think, still in the 90s, later in the 90s. I started graduate school in 96, something like that. And so I was there a long time. And then yeah, so that I think really helped me, formulate ways of like, how can we think about teaching, and how can we think about the work that we do? How do we connect? Like the students in the class had like an option of doing an internship component where they would do like policy briefs on reproductive technologies and things like that as part of the class. So like this model of connection that's interdisciplinary, that's that has community work and involvement was something that has really stayed with me. In addition to like the work around PAR that we did at the CUNY Graduate Center. And that like that about now from like you're like, wow, this like CUNY network. And that's kind of like some of our formative stuff there. So yeah, so ultimately I decided they were more flexible and all this kind of stuff. And I went and I started at St. Peter's in 2001.
2001.
2001 is when I started at St. Peter's.
And by flexible, you mean that you thought that you were going to be able to do your own thing at St. Peter's within your role as, well, you'll say within like your starting role in comparison to the health, the research, the hospital research position, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
So it was more because I hadn't finished yet. I still didn't finish my doctorate. I went like straight, kind of straight through for that. And I remember what point I was at. I don't even remember at this point, maybe like but I wasn't finished yet. I had to still do like my dissertation and all of that. And so St. Peter's was more flexible with my time and understanding that, okay, you're going to need some time to work on that. And so we'll support you in that. And because where I started at St. Peter's as an administrator. And I ran it was actually, yeah, it was the first, like they had just opened this thing called the Academic Success Program. There had been iterations of this in the past, but like this new formulation, okay, they're going to have this program. And then they were hiring someone to do it, to like start it from the ground up, basically. So that's what I came in to do. And I remember my office was in the 3rd floor of Pope. That whole thing now is a STEM center. But there was an office there, and I ran Summer Academy, which was kind of like a program to kind of like what EOF has now. It was kind of trying to parallel a lot of like, because EOF is an incredibly successful and important program, but it can only like support a certain number of students, right, at a time. And what the Academic Success Program did was try to get at the rest, everybody else that it couldn't encompass. So that program still exists today. Somebody else is doing it. I believe Tushar is still in charge of that program. And
So
it's grown and expanded.
You designed it, like they had an outline and you built on it, or they?
Yeah,
Okay.
they had
And
an outline in.
and what kind of students did you cater to through the academic success program?
So these are it was students who needed additional support, who entered, they kind of like called the category conditional admit students. So students who didn't exactly meet the admissions criteria, but are that they wanted to offer, support to, and, try to have like, successful. But this is back when like SATs were still, because now we've gone SAT optional. So some of those kind of gatekeeping things are not in place now. So I wonder how they organize some of this criteria.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, but yeah, so it was students that they felt coming in might need additional support. So part of that was by starting with this Summer Academy program. And Summer Academy was meant to like kind of help boost some like content areas, get 3 college credits. That always was very helpful for students, to have like 3 college credit, getting to know each other before like the mad rush of like the first year experience of college. So that kind of thing. So that, and there was some other programs that we did, like there was a bounce back program for students who were on academic probation. Again, just more like advising and support and like one-on-one work and programs. And even then, I think that's where, I don't know how it was, but I met up with like Anna Brown and stuff like that. And we used to do poetry slams. When I say we, I don't mean me out there like, doing, but with students who would line up in the quad, which does not get used as much as a space now that there's Pinto Plaza. Like things tend to like, events tend to happen here, but the quad, we used to like go out there and have these poetry slams. So that would be also part of the programming for that. And I worked a lot, worked closely with folks that Surrey and everybody, McLaughlin. At that point, my office was near or across from, it was called the call center. Now it's CASE. And the call center was what is now the STEM center. That's where it was. So like, my office was in the corner there. And like, we would like interact a lot. I would bring people over for like tutoring stuff, like whatever supports. It was like really walking distance. I worked with Barbara Melchion, who's been at the college for many years, and in that, or had been. And then what happened was there was an opening for, I was already like finishing, I'm wrapping up my dissertation.
Mhm.
I'm gonna like, finish and graduate. So I was looking at like what would be my options now that, with a doctorate or whatever. Because usually what we go into is something like in teaching. So before I finished, there was an opening in the School of Education. Um, and um, I at first I'm like, people were encouraging me to apply. And then I'm like, do you think that, I mean, because I don't have K-12 teaching experience. Like I wasn't like a teacher within that. Most of my experience in education has been working with, and I didn't even get into like all the other stuff because, I don't want to take up that much time with this, right? Uh, but, uh, but, um, but like I had done in my time at CUNY, a lot of work with youth serving organizations. And that I felt was really impactful. We did a collaboration with the Miss Foundation, and I got to meet different, like, I was so amazed and impressed by like the work that youth were doing and organizing across the country. One was in Montana, on a reservation. One was in Colorado. One was in San Francisco. All like youth-led initiative making change in communities.
Mhm.
So that that and other like work that I have done with educational equity concepts. So all of these are like what they had in common was that they're like youth serving um, organizations, and in some youth-led organizations in where I saw learning and education happening outside of school. So that was more, and then research with schools and stuff like that. So that was more my experience. So I was, at first concerned, like, do you think I'm going to fit in that, right? Um, but like I met some of the people in the department at like a basketball game. I remind them of this. I'm like, I don't know if you remember this, but I was in a basketball game, St. Peter's basketball game. Some of our students I had met, like, and went to support. um, and so one of the professors was there, and we had a conversation, and I guess he saw me like interacting with students and stuff like that. And one of the things that the education department had prided itself in is like wanting to like be there for students and support students. So later he tells me that, like, oh, later you'll tell your children or grandchildren someday that like you got this job because you went to a basketball game. Because one of the things, like, in addition to whatever interview process, that they saw firsthand, that like, interacting with relationship building was important to me. Um, and so that they saw that as something that they wanted, that they would fit in with the ethos and the mission of the department. And so then I think that was 3 years later. So
Mhm.
I was in as an administrator there for 3 years, and then um, applied, and this is the only place I applied to. Um, and I kind of like, I know it here. I like the students. I like the environment. It's small. I get to know people. I like the one-on-one work. And we get to do things. There's like
Right.
a corner of people where we could make possibility happen.
Was
And
St.
so
Peter's St. Peter's is uh
college then.
same okay, right, right. St. Peter's today has a reputation of being one of the most diverse institutions. Um, was it as diverse when um you started, and was that one of the reasons why you stayed? Because you
Yeah,
did
that's
mention
definitely one of
students.
the reasons. Yes. That was definitely one of the reasons, and I really didn't even like look for other places when because in part I was still like working on and they took a chance on me on doing that because I hadn't finished yet, my doctorate. But like what kept me there was that, like, I liked the intimate environment. I liked, we're federally designated as an HSI. Um, and I'm like, this is where I want to, I want to be here. Like, I want this kind of, it's more diverse now, like in a traditional, like when you, because diversity sometimes is code for all different things, but like when you look at the breakdown, it's like, it is diverse in that kind of like traditional definition. And though it was before, when I started, it is more so now,
Okay.
from what I've seen of the numbers. So so when we first started, like I said, with HSI, I have to look back because I don't exactly remember. You need to be like 25% and above, like Latinx identify. HSI stands for Hispanic Serving Institution. And so I think we were, when I first started, around that 25% mark. We're at like 40 or 50% now.
Oh,
So
wow.
it definitely has increased
Mhm.
since I've been here.
And it
I
was
see it as a
still,
positive.
was it a commuter school also back then?
There was still dorms. There were dorms. I think, wow, I have to think back now. I think was it Millennium? One of the newer ones had like recently opened. When I was here, we didn't have the bridge. I remember that was like a big, in terms of like milestones. I think that'll probably be a question you'll ask me eventually. But one of them was the bridge. So you know the bridge I'm talking about?
Yeah, when was it
I don't
built?
know what year it was built, but it was during my time here. I remember um, the kind of controversy that it was at first. It's, what's the point of this bridge? And I,
Was it
I understood
expensive?
it. Is
Was
it,
it
I
was
mean,
it Mhm.
yes, but I don't think this was something that was in combination with the city, because what was happening is, and now, like, I think you see some of the changes there that I don't know if any of this will end up like having to be deleted, but anyway, there
Oh, I
were
can
like
pause.
people, you can just tell them later.
Okay.
But like, I think there were like accidents or deaths and things like that in that intersection on Kennedy Boulevard.
Because of the number of students?
It wasn't students per se, but just like, how like there's like certain areas, blocks, whatever, that there could be like accidents. So there was like concern about that in that intersection there. So to make it safer for students, that's why you see the bridge. And that's why you see, like, I don't know if you notice that there's like kind of like a gate there that makes it hard to, like, you have to like cross at the crosswalks. And I think it was because the conversation around traffic was because, people crossing the streets could get hurt. But
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
maybe the whole thing might have to be deleted, but I'm okay with that.
It's
That's
like,
something that I recall,
mhm.
like that was a conversation, but the city like chipped in, if not most of it, a lot of it. And I think it's used a lot now. At
Oh,
first people
okay.
were like, no one's going to use it. But like, is your impression that people use the bridge? I
It
know I
does come
do.
in handy. It really
Yeah.
does. Yeah.
And it helps make some of the buildings more accessible, which is another issue.
Yes,
Um,
when we have to carry a lot, I'm assuming it makes life really easy for folks um, have a lot of stuff and try to move into dorms or um,
yes, and people with
also, yeah,
disabilities in particular. So
yeah,
that's
the
something else that.
yeah, the weather. And also I think
Mhm.
just it can be daunting to cross that street too.
Yeah.
Because we know Jersey City drivers.
Drivers,
Yeah.
period. This is why I don't
Yeah,
drive.
yeah.
I like take public transportation.
Well, we also live in New Jersey, which is like
Yes.
notorious for,
Jersey,
yeah, awful
we've got lots of
drivers.
reputations for things,
Yes. So
but I
that
find it helpful. Mhm.
that brings us into our next question. What were the larger societal issues during your time at St. Peter's, and what impact did it have on you or the St. Peter's community? And you started in 2001. Um, uh, was this, what month in 2000? Do you happen to remember?
August is when I
Oh my
started.
God. So
So,
if you can
yes.
start from, 9
Yeah, so
11.
like a month into it
Yeah.
was 9/11. So that was definitely a significant like life event societal event that happened. Um, and thinking about that time now, yeah, that was scary. I was in Jersey City when I was on campus when it happened. And what's it called, from where we were on campus, we were able to see the smoke from the buildings, the twin towers.
And did you
And
know where the smoke was coming from at the time?
at first no, like, but then we started hearing things like what's happening, uh like on I don't remember exactly everything. Something that's like, these things sometimes I think about it now, should have like written more about, right? But at that time, um there was like, it's an accident, there's a plane that crashed into one of the buildings. Oh my God, that's like, so I remember some of us in the faculty, we congregated in, was it the dean's office? It was a dean's office. I remember I was there with, and Suri was there. I think it was me. So there were a group of us were there, and we're like, oh my God, what's happening? Like,
Mhm.
um,
Were students
and
still in class?
I wasn't a professor at that point, so I didn't like have classes with students, so I don't know. Yeah, students I think were in classes.
Right. It was a week.
um
It was a weekday
it
because
was a
you were at
weekday.
work. So, and it
Yes.
was morning, 9 a.m., 9 a.m. ish when everything happened. So we're like, I'm wondering if students were in class. Like
Yeah,
it
I
was
think
running as
so.
normal, right? And then all of a
It
sudden,
was.
mhm.
And then we're just hearing like, oh, there's this thing that's happening. And then like later on, then they say, okay, no, this was intentional, there's a second one. And people were like really
Oh
shocked
my
and
God.
scared. And people are like, but I have family that work in the city. I know my husband at the time my husband was working at that time in the city. um and so like, so everybody was like checking in on loved ones. He didn't end up like, in his case, he didn't end up going into the bus driver kind of like turned around when they saw
Oh
like,
my
oh,
God.
there's some weird stuff happening, we're turning around.
Good,
So they
good.
turned around. But like, that wasn't the case for everyone. For a lot of people who couldn't get in touch, and
Oh my
you
God.
know, so it's, yeah, I had like yeah, anyway, I knew some people who were in the area and that were working there, and it was, terrifying for them, and for everyone. And so then that at that point there was uncertainty as like, is there more coming? So like here we hear like, okay, there's the first plane, and then this, then okay, maybe it's an accident that's like horrific, is everybody, and
Mhm.
then it's like, oh no, here's a second one, and like what else is happening?
Did
So
t- terrorism, Al Qaeda
yeah,
ever, was it something that was known? Did you all assume it was possibly a terrorist attack?
I didn't assume that. No, I thought it was like, one of these things with just like a accident plane crash type thing.
But
I had
on the
no
second one,
idea.
like it wasn't so
Yeah, no, when the
everything that
second one happened, then it was like, what is happening? But
right,
like, at least for me, I didn't, I didn't think like, yeah, I don't know how, I don't think I was that aware that like Al Qaeda was a thing or any of that kind
right.
of stuff. I wasn't aware of any of that,
Okay. It
until it
wasn't
started
a
coming up.
it wasn't a part of conversation until after, right? That
Yes,
really
right,
pretty much every, well, within the context of the US, right?
right.
Everyone knew. And
Yes.
you right, okay. So it wasn't really
It was through
that
the
something
news, not
common.
like, yeah, yeah.
Of course, the
It was
news and the
through,
government, the federal government.
yes. Then it
Okay,
was quick
so
to like, to say
right.
what's happening. But I
So
remember in
really, okay,
it was
so
certain, like, it was not, okay, now it's intentional, it's terrorist stuff, like somebody.
okay.
But the concern was who, what's it called? Like, is there more to come?
And will it
Right?
hit Jersey City?
Yes. And will it hit Jersey City? We're right here.
Right.
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 And then, some people were like, so, I was in the quad at some point, everybody was leaving the campus. I was in the
Oh,
quad
okay.
talking to students for some of it.
Professors, well, were professors told to release their students early, like the school shut down? Like,
Yes, I
okay.
believe, you know what, I don't remember, I don't remember a lot of it. Again, since I wasn't a professor at that time, I didn't have a class, so I didn't have that kind of direction. But I believe that the campus closed, everybody, I don't know if there was lockdown. I don't know if it was this, but I think like public transportation came to a halt. I might be confusing this with something else, but I think that we couldn't use public transportation anymore.
So some were
Um,
stuck on campus.
so right. And so and with the uncertainty, because they're like, is it gonna hit home? Is it gonna hit here? Are we safe or whatever?
Right.
So some of the students who were, there were some who were still on campus, others just like left, if they could,
Okay.
they
Right.
just left to,
I
be
would
with
flee.
family or
You're
whatever,
like, if this
I
is
mean,
the
of course.
end, I'd rather be
No,
with
no, I
family.
gotta
I
be
can't imagine. Oh my
the
God. And you depended on public transportation at the time as well.
yes, I did.
Oh man.
I'm trying to remember. I got a ride home.
No, it's
So I
um
okay. So the last thing I'm gonna say about it, because this can be its own like oral history of that time, which might be a good idea for somebody to do. Anyway, is that like I remember that there were like a lot of like there were St. Peter students and staff who were directly involved in um, supporting cleanup efforts and things like that. Um, and afterwards, there some of us were involved in like kind of the anti-war efforts, because that kind of led to, as we know historically, okay, let's go to war with Iraq now. um, and many of us even at that time were like, what does one have to do with the other? And we're involved in like protests and rallies around that. That was like a big thing that was happening at that time when the decision to go to the Iraq War. But I remember the 9/11 was like a deeply traumatic time for a lot of folks, in particular because there were many who had family members, friends, who were in the area or who perished
mhm.
in those events,
Was there a shift?
and just that we were close by.
Was there a shift
So
at St. Peter's that you noticed? Were anything that people did differently after 9/11 because of
I
the
didn't
trauma?
have anything really to compare to because I just started. Remember, I had just started
Mm.
that
A
like
month, a
that
month
year.
earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, I just started like, and it's like, okay, wow. So this was my introduction to this place. And then but I'm gonna like move to other things,
Mhm.
other like events. But like I said, there was just like a lot around that, memorials and all of this.
Right.
Um, and another thing during that time, when I say during that time, in the early 2000s, um, I was invited to be one of the advisors for LASO, the Latin American Service Organization, which I thought was cool because when I was a college student, as I mentioned before, I was also in LASO. There it was called Latin American Student Organization. Here it was Service Organization. So I kind of like that switch, um, and in here. So I was and yeah, I have very fond memories of that. And then later I was, co-advisor. Now I'm advisor to Reis. But in some of that early time, um, there were students in Lasso who were very involved in, at that point, it was Dream Act organizing. So the Dream Act was in Congress in the early 2000s, and like it just it just kept like, I think of it now, like so many times we were just so close for it passing, and then it didn't pass. It didn't have enough votes. And I remember it was like bipartisan or whatever. McCain was one of the co-sponsors of one of the variations of the Dream Act. So this has been going on for a long time. What the fight that we see now, it's like, has been. But I think what the students really did was bring much more awareness to the campus about it. Um, one of the events that stays with me now. I share this story, that the students totally organized, right? And that was, they did a sleep out. So, and they created these like t-shirts that said, "Why sleep when you can't dream?" Um,
Mm.
and they were out there in the quad, like handing pamphlet, like handing out information, handing out t-shirts, and the t-shirts explained what the dream act was and what it does. So like, you want a t-shirt here, and there were like conversations about that, and the conversations at that time were around, and I know now there's like the discourse has shifted in terms of that, but at first it was like, children who are, and like how are you going to punish, them with these kinds of laws, right? So there was a lot of awareness around, consciousness raising around that on behalf of the students, that I thought they really did a good job, and they like did a sleep out in the quad. It wasn't necessarily welcomed at the time, by the administration, right? Because in the hiding out quad, they were very successful, even if not at that, thinking like, okay, the efforts didn't lead to a change in the Dream Act. If they're hearing this, they can think, what, years later it did have an impact, at least institutionally, because now we have a center for undocumented students, which was not the case at that point. So they helped to raise awareness of like, listen, this is something that's happening. And then later, in later years, we had students who would kind of like, are you there?
Mhm.
Okay, so the students would like talk to us individually in classes at this point. I'm a professor, and they would talk to us about like, okay, here's some like gatekeeping things that are happening. As a private institution, we had always, even before this number or not. Again, I don't know if they're gonna take that part out, but we had always done that. The university had, but it was like kind of more on the hush hush. Like it was like, it's just something that we do. We're not calling attention to it. Um, okay, that's fine. And so then there would be some of us faculty and staff who would talk to each other, and try to work out ways to make things happen. So while that's happening, um, in 2012, there was also like these big protests nationally that were happening around immigration. Um, and that led to yet another like round. This is Obama was president at this point. Led to another round of like, oh, like Dream Act push, and still nada. But at least there was something that came from that, and that was DACA, and that came about in 2012. So that was like that was another kind of like defining moment, because it did, as like limited as it is, as much as it excluded and positioned like this kind of dichotomy of good versus like deserving versus non-deserving immigrant, like it has made a difference in the lives of many students.
Mhm.
um
Is this when you became really involved, in LASSO, working with students? Was this when you became involved in the immigrant rights movement and organizing? Um, or did you have some experience before?
before like the students from like the LASSOS, this is before 2012. Before that, like my involvement with the students, and let me think, I don't think I did as much around, um no, I didn't. um I just remember more like the like kind of more connections with, through the university, through working with students, that it came about.
Hmm.
In one of the summer academies, one of the things that they did afterwards is like they had trips to the detention center through First Friends.
So they
Yeah,
made
but
you,
before that, I had it.
so they were the
Inspired
ones
it.
that, yeah, and they were the ones that helped, that introduced you to this fight.
Yes,
Oh,
to
because
the Mhm.
soon after DACA, which happened in 2012, in 2015, you become the director for the Center for Undocumented Students here at
Yes.
St. Peter's. And I'm curious to know how you got that to, was it you? Was it a collective of people? How that came to be? Why? Why did we think a TCUS was necessary? Um, and how you became director?
Okay. So at this time, let me think. Before that, before like the 2012, I had, because as you know, I also had done like research and stuff like that. So it was through my work with Lasso in the early 2000s, then translated to like, research. So we had this research group called ROLE, Researchers of Latino Education. At that time, Latino was with Arroga. Now it's with an X. Um, but like that was like the time period too, right? That was reflective of the language. And because each fight leads to like a certain change, and then things like language evolves, right? With further change. So one of the things that we did in role was in looking in that, like interviewing organizers for the Dream Act. So like it was, yeah, my work with Lasso and all of that really, so I had started before that and were during that time in the 2000s. And then with this group with Roll, we did this thing, and this was with, because I know, as you know, with Anna Brown, and the Social Justice House had been there beforehand. So that like came first, the Social Justice House, and she had also been involved in for years in doing like organizing around this. I don't know when she started. I know before that it was like anti-war work. But like we kind of like got together, and Nicholas Sharavati also invited us at that time. He was the person who was the Guarini Center person, and connected us to this group that was doing like research on how Jesuit institutions should support undocumented students. um, and so that was like a study that they did, and then there was a report back where we all went to Washington D.C., like students from different Jesuit universities, and so our role research team went, and some of like SPJ students with Dr. Brown, and like I said, Nicholas says in his role, and Kornakia was even there, and he was president at the time. I should mention, maybe not as an aside, but another kind of like life event that happened during my time here that was impactful and sad, and as well, is that the president, Lachlan, who was the president of the university when I first started, passed away unexpectedly during his time as president. And then Kornakia, who was one of the people who first hired me. He was like, I think he was a dean at that time. So he was one of the people, I think, on my hiring committee when I first came here as an administrator. Anyway, that was an aside. But that was an interesting tidbit. So okay, back to, all right. So then we went there, and then at that time we were organizing for, or the group was like advocating for comprehensive immigration reform. So instead of piecemeal efforts like the Dream Act, but just to have like a full like
Right.
reform package, right? Now it's not like, now even that's like not not something that people are advocating for, because that always meant having some kind of border security measures, which means keeping more people out and excluding more people, more deportations in
Mhm.
exchange for keeping some, right? So keeping some, but then deporting and, in violent ways the rest, right? Anyway,
Mhm.
so that's what we were advocating for when we went to DC. We listened to this report and then we went to like the various offices. So I'm trying to remember, was this 2011? I don't really remember when this was. It was like earlier in that time.
Did you happen to um did you ever think that the Jesuit mission, like before this report came out, did you ever think that it was um that the Jesuit mission should, and as a Jesuit institution should be um you know, at least open-minded to the efforts of the students and should be advocating for undocumented people, undocumented students, the way students were because of the values and mission of the university? Like, did that ever come to mind before the report that, oh yeah,
Oh
we should be
yeah.
doing this?
Oh yeah. I mean, definitely. That was in this from the time of Lasso organizing, right?
Oh, okay.
That's when that first started. These conversations, started happening. Like that's what's happening at the
Mm,
national level. But then what are we doing at St. Peter's? And so, like I said, it's these informal conversations with
right.
faculty and
Mhm.
staff that it's like, okay, here's student A that has a situation. What do we do? How can we
Right.
and so part of it is like educating ourselves, getting in contact um, with people who might know some of the answers to that. And
Mhm.
then, but like what happened with the report and with Kornacki also being there is that now we had more of a rationale, like that, like, okay, here's this report that we can use as like, it's not just us saying it. This is like other Jesuit because that often is like it's like, see, the other Jesuits are saying this, so we should be doing this too. I can stay on for a little bit more. So what happened was then from there, like, people were listening, we're like, okay, so this is something that like we're being called to do. It's part of our mission. We've kind
Right.
of like in kind of like in quieter ways have been doing some of this, but like not in an explicit way. And with 2012 and DACA, and with like a conversation about dreamers, it became more part of the national conversation about like, whatever coming out of the shadows. That's what it was. That was the framing at that time. And
Oh, I
then now
remember
that,
that.
remember that?
I
Yeah. So
remember during his speech. Yeah, I remember.
whose speech?
President Obama.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So all of that was like part of the conversation. And so there was a statement that President Kornacki made about that too, like because that was, like now, like you see statements, there's something that's happening and then there's a
Mhm.
statement in response. So there was something that, and he's like, what, we're going to open the door he called it opening the door to dreamers.
Mm.
So so you could find that somewhere.
Oh, so was the school not um did the school have like certain requirements that would prevented undocumented students from applying?
No, at that time, from what I know, we didn't. I think he was trying to call attention to that we did already do that. I know that there were some places that were concerned about that, because I remember students saying, oh, well, my guidance counselor said I can't go to college because I don't have my papers, type of thing.
Right.
The problem was financing. That was always because getting in, there was ways, but in terms of financial aid, that was what was more difficult. And so there were like scholarships that were private scholarships, which is something that helped students, since ours didn't really depend on immigration status. But like, a lot of the majority of our students depend on some kind of state or federal aid. And so that's what
Mhm.
mostly students were missing out on, which now only didn't come. So another milestone, 2018, in New Jersey's life, that's like a big milestone too, because now there was this change in who can get tag. And so we had
Right.
students who definitely benefited from that and
Mhm.
came here when they may not have been able to afford to come here before. So that's like that's a more recent
Mhm.
one. But going back to like the start of the center, so yes, these conversations, and then that kind of like solidified, okay, so here's the rationale that we have. See, this is like what folks are saying, this is what students would be saying. And so it was Anna Brown, a student, and I think Nicholas Shalavati, who like wrote up a proposal to open a center. Let's saying, okay, so like we're saying all of these things. So now let's open the center. So it's kind of evolved from all of these conversations and then solidified into this.
What was the vision of the center? Like, what were some of the goals? Just very briefly, what the center would be dedicated to doing for undocumented students.
So the vision and the mission statement was more to support the students and families who are here who are undocumented. To I'm trying to think of like what was the wording of the original proposal, but that was basic. That was the main thing, and to like raise
Mm,
awareness and create a climate in the university where immigrants, regardless of immigration status,
mhm,
feel welcome on the campus. So that was like so offering. There was the intention of offering like material, um, kind of hospitality and like those types of like supports, so that it isn't the same, like there are more, like the pathways to navigate university, which are already hard, are
right.
not made so much harder because of status. So that was kind of like original. So like the more recent turns of like doing more like projects and research and stuff like that. That's a more recent addition. But it was always about like community awareness and supporting
Mhm,
specifically the students on campus who
right.
are undocumented.
Right, because
Mhm.
it was, so the vision was to create um, something at the university, right? Department at the university that would cater to the specific needs of the undocumented students or students of in mixed status families that had certain needs that maybe student services could not really uh, fulfill or possibly understand, grasp the concept of what it means to be undocumented. TCUS was going to fill that gap.
Mhm. Yes. Specifically at first, I believe it was for undocumented students. And I think from
Mm,
there, it expanded more to like mixed as we, learned more. Because the question that we would always get asked, and we don't offer an answer to this, is like, how many do you have? Like we always get asked that question.
it's a
But
little
like,
right. I
but
don't think that's appropriate. Okay.
yeah. So
Why do
how
you want to
many?
know?
I'm like, I'm not gonna,
Um,
but
undocumented
right.
and documented
Right. Well,
students.
and that's the thing that within that, documented is that a category of undocumented students, or is that
Mm,
like another? So we were just like,
okay.
that's just
Oh,
like a terminology thing. The catch-all undocumented is
right.
but it's not just documented though. It's and these are things that I learned more as
And
part of the
documented,
workshops.
me, can you define really quickly, like five
So,
words
so
or?
documented, meaning people that have DACA, which refers to deferred action. Wait, I have to look it up now.
Action for
But like
childhood arrivals.
for childhood arrivals, damn it, that's what it was.
Yes.
So DACA, and then there's TPS, temporary protected status, which by the way, it's like for Haiti got extended another 18 months, so that's good.
Mm.
Um, and people
But
that don't have,
they were also part of
that's
the
new.
vision of TCUS. They would also be catered
Just
to.
undocumented in general. Like
Oh,
it
okay.
wasn't really specified, but like as we were like doing the work, there are these, there's, for example, it became like a different kind of umbrella, because it's still
Mhm.
within this idea of like undocumented in terms of not having access to some of the same supports that
Right.
students that have who are green card holders or citizens have. It's kind of like different
Exactly.
layers of access, right? And this idea that like, you can't just be like, okay, I'm going to go become a citizen, because that was always a big like, well, why don't they just become, if they hate it so much, why don't become citizens? If they could, they would do it. Like that's a
Mm-hmm.
very, it just like shows a lack of understanding. And that was a lot
Right.
of like what we were doing, like teaching ourselves
Sure.
and like each other about what does undocumented mean, because there was like even that term was very unclear. And then of course with mixed status families, so you could be a citizen but like your parents are undocumented. We have a number of students with that situation,
Mm-hmm.
um or have extended family members.
Mm-hmm.
And then the ITIN holders, or people that don't have a social security, because if you have DACA, you have you get a social
Access.
security,
Yeah.
you get like 2 year at the moment, right? It's like 2 years work authorization, and like other, you can get in New Jersey, you can get a driver's license.
Mm-hmm.
Although another milestone,
Another
um,
milestone.
is that in 2020 in New Jersey, undocumented immigrants, regardless, whether you have a social or not, you can get a New Jersey driver's license. Before, only if you had DACA or TPS or something like that, that's how you can get a driver's license, but not if you
Mhm.
didn't have a social. So that's like a big deal for
So
us.
from when you first started at St. Peter's and you became aware of what was happening in the immigrants' right movement, up until now, specificity has really changed the conversation, right? The more work is done by youth and allies, the more specific we get, right? With implementation of TPS and DACA, we have new identities. So you've really seen what Dream Act and what that early, those early years, right, have built up to the number of identities, the number of people from different backgrounds that TCUS today serves, right? What started as undocumented students serving the documented students on campus, it's now as an umbrella term when you look at what kind of folks you see at the Center for Undocumented Students. It's really all different types of undocumented, all different types. And you've seen that progression, right? You've seen like us being able to put a label on that, because there is a big difference between, being a TPS holder and being documented and
Right.
then having nothing at all. There's huge differences. So you saw that.
Right.
And then just TCUS changed as, right, the conversation changed, right? And um, that's why there were workshops on DACA, but there are now also workshops on TPS, right? Like that was a need, that was a community need, right? So that and that's exactly what happened, right? From its inception to today, right?
Yes.
And you
And
saw
even
that
like that like the terms of like it's like part of our vocabulary now. Oh, documented and
documented,
so forth.
yeah.
But that wasn't a thing before
Well,
2012. Like that's a new,
undocu,
yeah,
undocu is
undocu,
another, yeah.
all the language and terminology to
Mhm.
to like, reflect this
Yeah.
specificity. Yeah.
And
And
how did you become director? Because I don't think you weren't like one of the authors of the proposal. So how did you become director? Did they nominate you or did you have to apply?
no, I think it was just like one of these. I'm sorry. I think you're gonna have to put it on pause.
Sure, sure.
Okay. Yeah, so from there, like from like the collaborations and stuff that we had, we proposed, or had proposed, like, okay, so maybe we'll do something to like expand, because there was no funding for TICUS at this point. There really wasn't anything. There wasn't a director, there was just a space, and that was through the social justice house. Father Rocco like did a whole like thing of blessing the space, and we were all like part
Mhm.
of that.
Okay, so it was
um
always there. That was the
it was, it
designated
says it
office.
in 2014, that's when it was, that's like the space was there before there was like official director and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But the social justice house had been there from before that.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, the social justice house has been, is like, that has a different, like, it has a long tradition. It's been there. And like I said, that's something that Dr. Brown can speak to more.
Mhm. But TCUS never
But then
changed offices. It has always been the second floor of the social justice house.
has always been,
Yeah.
yes. And at that point, I like submitted a proposal to like, okay, so let's, to the provost at the time, I think it was like, okay, so, I can, come into like, try to like find ways to, create like, look for like funding streams or something like that for this place. So I didn't exactly think, but what happened was that he said, okay, so you can be the director then. I'm like, okay. That's how that happened.
Okay.
But yeah, no, it came about when I'm like, all right, let me, I want to pitch this, like, this idea of like, maybe for like to help out in this way. And so then that's how kind of like that it happened. And then I've been ever since. But in that, and then in the history too, I should note that Dr. Gomez, Marcelo Gomez, and she um, was a director for a semester too, when I was on sabbatical. And so she helped to try to get like, because our thing was like, okay, so now we have the space. How do we support students? Like, how do we implement the mission? And so there was an initial grant that they had through CarePoint. CarePoint. So they like gave like, and that money the first year was used to pay for a student organizer. At that time, it was Lee, to be like kind of like someone who is working to support the center. So like that happened in the first year, before me. And then afterwards, like I said, Dr. Marilu had also tried to like get like funding from corporate folks and stuff like that. And then when I came back from sabbatical, um, just continued the work on a limited budget. And it was through church connections, as through our existing networks, that like we started getting some donations, especially after the 2016 election. So I feel like that's where we got like more attention and funding to be able to give students more things, like so some like the book value, it's starting to get, just as an aside, it's starting to get like stormy here. I don't know if it is, but anyway, so if it like cuts out, it's for that.
Oh yeah, same.
So
A little windy.
so yeah, so it looks, yeah, stormy. So it looks like I forgot what I was saying. Yeah, so other things that we're able to now like offer students and fund that we didn't have, like that we didn't have before. And it was through connections to churches, donations, that we're able to do anything.
And keep
So, and
TCUS
then of course
afloat.
this, right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then just like the one thing that has been consistent is having like students who are part of the TCUS team, right? Who are co-delivering workshops, conceptualizing, all that stuff. So I'm not like alone in this, like, okay, I'm this like sole director that's in charge of everything. No, it's like, it's always been like a collective effort. It started with student organizing. It continued with like support folks from and allies from faculty, from and staff that would like get together and like brainstorm and think about what are things that we could do, and continues in that way, like as you've seen, in different ways. How do we partner? How do we collaborate? How do we support each other and students? What are programs that we should do and we should have? And as we learn more things, we you know we then add to the process and add to the work as we see it. Like at one, we saw that there was a need, you know what? There's this whole thing about ITINs. We need to do a workshop around ITINs. Right now there's driver's licenses is now a thing. So we're having our
Right.
second workshop on how to do driver's licenses. So these things have been really in response to changes that have happened. And over time, that one of the things that I would say being here is that it has been not just like in moments, although I guess it's always made up of in moments, but just seeing over time, like the change that has happened, like the changes you're saying in narratives and in within immigration itself, not in the national sense, but also in the local sense, like all of the push for change that's happened um, has like one of the moments, for example, that there were a couple of moments where students like not just a couple, but just that come to mind. One was with one of the first kind of like Black Lives Matter protests that we had on campus as a result of at that point it was Eric Garner and I Can't Breathe. And like, the students met up at the social justice house. This is separate from TCUS, but the social justice house, and with like, kind of, we like kind of all like walked to, kind of like did a march. We walked to, I forgot where in Jersey City, had a circle there. I remember Dwayne was in campus ministry at that time and he was part of that. So that was one of the first, was that 2014, something like that.
Well,
Reminds me of that because now there's been like two this year, Breonna Taylor, and so there's a history of this movement. In 2016, there was another time, another moment where like where Trump became president, and I remember getting these texts like at 3:00 in the morning, like throughout the night, from some students, and it's like, oh my God, it looks like he's gonna win. All right, we need to do something. Let's mobilize, like he won. Like this is like bad news for immigrant communities. And like 2 days later, there was like a walkout on campus. So that was an important moment. Like all like the students all participated. We went into I think it was the quad at that time. And there was on the day that was like kind of the resistance. But before the resistance and the like, we need to mobilize, we need to do these things. But the day of the election, I remember the social justice house was packed with people who were in mourning. And we had some alumni who like didn't go to work that day, and like just like came here just to like de-stress, to be in community, because a la casita, because it was like a painful thing.
La
But yeah,
Casita is the social
La
justice
Casita,
house.
the social justice house. Because there's like couches, there's a kitchen, and and there were faculty
That's how
that
the
were there.
community. That's what the community calls the social justice house.
That's what some in the that's what some of us call it, La Casita, because it's a house. It's a literal house. Like I said, with couches, a kitchen, a backyard. Got to give it to Dr. Brown, who like decorates it beautifully with all these like you see all these posters of students and just different social justice. But now it's more and more students. You're up there with Cielo, and that was one of the this is something that the SPJ students organized. I don't remember what it even was, but we have now
so many crises at the same time.
This is the thing. I feel terrible because I'm like, which time was it, that this happened? But in this one, it ended like there was a wall that students had decorated and all of that turned into a table. And then we had food on that table. So that like the idea of bringing down the wall. So that was something that the SPJ students had organized. But like, and
Was
like
it?
you were one of the speakers. Cielo
Mm.
was one of the speakers there, I remember.
It wasn't
Um,
kids in my God, trauma laughing. Kids in cages, like
was it,
asylum seekers and folks coming in from Central America. Was it around that time?
it might have been, it was either that or when they were talking about building the wall. Um, but there was no,
I think
actually
that
there were
was like at
you know
the
what?
was
There
it
were
at the
two
same
of them.
time? I
There were
think.
two things. There was one about the wall. There were two walls, actually. There were two events that involved this now that I remember. But yeah, the second one was probably around that, around the time of forced the family separation policy, zero tolerance.
Yes, that's it.
So
That was
that was another one.
2017. 2017 when that
2017, 2018, por ahí.
yeah,
Yeah,
when the
something like
conversation
that.
started. So
Yes.
our
Again,
fears when
mhm.
when President Trump was elected were not out of paranoia because it
No,
happened. Our
he
fears, yeah,
fulfilled, like
he
it
really
was
did.
fulfilled. Deported. I mean, I'm not saying that like now there's, oh, now everything is so much better. No, there's still a lot, like thousands of deportations that
Right.
are happening. Like there was the stories that have come out of like in particular, like how many Haitian immigrants have been like deported and all of that. Anyway,
Right.
that there's like someone that's keeping track of the number, and the number is still pretty high. And I think it's because of the Title 42 expulsion thing. It's because of COVID, is what they're saying. But under that
Mhm.
policy, they're doing more of there's still deportations that are happening. But so one of the things that this does then, like kind of like in moving forward, is that it's like having more people, because people have been like, organizers have been like paying attention to and saying for years, like this is something that's happening, when we first started out with TCUS, like before it was, remember TCUS started before um the 2016 election, and we did like know your rights workshops. We had attorneys who would come and do workshops on like what to do in an ICE encounter. What does this mean around DACA? How do you fill out an
Mhm.
application? What does TPS mean? And like things like that. And just kind of what does undocumented mean? Why do you need to say that? And because this was another big one that still needs to be done. But like, why do you say undocumented, and why you need to erase illegal from your vocabulary when referring to people?
Right.
So that was like a lot of the initial work, and then it just, after the election, it became much more intense, the know
Mhm.
your rights. And there was then the policies that started coming about, like once this was happening, so we need to get the college, what happens if they come to campus, we need to have policies in place, we need to
Mhm.
prepare. So there was a lot of push from us, in the collective sense, to like, make it clear to people, we do not, because of FERPA, whatever, whatever it is that you have to say, but we have to protect our students' privacy, we have to protect them. If they come to campus, we can't just be like, okay, yeah, sure, and cooperate. And now like there's other things that support the non-cooperation, of course, with the caveat that like unless they have a subpoena or something, that a court order of some kind. But like there was a lot of these, so that's why you see the posters. And we had one before too at there's one in the social justice house. I don't know if it's still in the other offices, but there'd be these like posters of like, what to do in a, if in a nice encounter. And so those were things that
Mhm.
came about after the election, just like more around that too.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
That was okay. I thought that was happening for a while. Know your rights workshops have always been around, but they were increased in general, not just on campus, just in the United States. Community organizations were like, this is now a community need.
Yes.
We need to prepare our folks after the election. Okay. So people,
Yes.
okay. So general consensus, we need to prepare for the absolute worst.
Yes.
2016, and
And
that's and TCUS met strived hard to meet those community needs because
right. Because you can't like totally, meet every,
right,
it would be, there's
right.
always more that we could do, and should.
Being undocumented means a whole list of things, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
It means a whole,
Folks will not have the same stories. you know.
Yes. But in my time here, just like quick things, there's just been a lot that's happened like in that I'm, you know, we're not going to get into, but just like to list them. There's just been a lot that's happened, you know, because what is it like? You could do the math better than I can. I'm going to be here like 20 years. So there's a lot that we've seen happen over time. I was having this conversation before with other mujeres about this, about like how like some of these moments recreate themselves, but with the twists. So like I remember the Virginia Tech shootings. And when that happened on a college campus, I don't remember, it was also kind of in the 2000s, and the camp, and when that happened, I remember on campus there would be like lockdowns. So I don't know if you had to do lockdown drills when you were in high school, but like that's a thing more now in K-12. And so there was more
Yes, we
awareness
did.
around that, starting with the Virginia Tech, because you know, like the copycats, people that are scared. So like at that point we had gotten some calls of people threatening to do that. So I remember that we had a
Oh,
lockdown or
I
two.
thought it was
Um,
okay.
mhm.
So
It might have happened later too, but I remember that was like the first time that happened, and we had to do a lockdown.
oh, not
At the
Columbine in the
Columbine
90s.
happened before that too. Yeah, Columbine.
Okay.
When was Columbine? I'd have to look it up.
But
Um,
the conversation and then what happened in Florida at the high
heightened
school.
it again.
You
Yes,
also saw
and Sandy Hook.
in Sandy Hook.
Sandy Hook. Once I saw that, like, people are okay with children dying, because this is elementary school kids, and still
Right.
nothing around like like nothing
Mhm.
really
Oh,
happened.
and
So I'm like,
Superstorm
well, like
Sandy.
Superstore. Yes, that was another thing that we
We
went through.
have no
Superstorm
breaks.
Sandy.
No
There were
breaks.
just a lot of things that happened, you know.
Right.
There were a lot. There was a lot of stuff. And then obviously, you know, and I'm not even going to start that conversation, but like COVID.
Mhm. Oh, okay.
This is
Okay. COVID.
another like
Right.
big life event, like that, you know.
Mhm.
I don't know how
Would you like to share, within your the scope of, your work and specifically the immigrant community, undocumented community on campus? Can you maybe share a couple of words on how COVID has affected undocumented students at St. Peter's, or maybe just share a little bit about that experience, what
yes.
TCUS
So how
did,
has
what TCUS saw? Yeah.
okay, a couple of things. Well, one thing that's on my mind right now is that I had found it very upsetting that in general, but also with our students, but in general, what we saw is that um, this narrative of the essential workers, you know, the people who are at the front line, like, you know, in the supermarkets, or who are cleaning, or who, you know, are in the health professions and things like
Mhm.
that. So there's like a large group within that, like who are, so there was like this lifting up of us. See, this is essential work that they're doing. They're risking their lives and all this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Um, and so there was a lot of like, okay, like, I don't know, like verbal uplifting of that. But when it came down to like, all right, how do are you going to support people materially for this? Then it's like, you're not so essential. So it has, one of the big things is that from all of the like federal and even state kind of supports that people were getting through like stimulus and all these other types of things,
Mhm.
undocumented communities were systematically excluded from all of that, and yet they were more likely to you know to need that kind of support. So that's something that has been like a big problem,
Right.
you know, because there's always been this issue of exploitative conditions. So on top of that,
Right.
that didn't go away, right?
Mhm.
The
But
exploitation
isn't
didn't go
there,
away.
right? Isn't there a significant percentage of essential workers who are undocumented?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, across all of those things, including in like in like, you know, yeah. So across all of that, yes, and
Mhm.
that's what I mean. Like, you know, on the one hand, it's like, oh, celebrate essential workers, but you know, but not, and you know, have them sacrifice but not but not like that we have to like, we're okay with them sacrificing, but we're not going to do anything to support. So like that was something that was
course.
really, that's really,
Mhm.
and in New Jersey only recently, and has there been like, okay, so now there's like a fund. In New York, there's a good fund, a substantial fund. In New Jersey, it's like, but it's still, it's really not enough. And it's like it's 2021. This pandemic has been going on how long now? And now is when
Mhm.
there's going to be like crumbs of support.
Right.
And
And
this
mm,
includes the CARES Act that went to colleges. So Rutgers, for example,
uh-huh.
had a fund for students. Um, who who are undocumented, because like the cares under the previous administration, the cares, and then I think it's like HERF or something, like different variations of it, but like the way Congress had worded it, it didn't exclude anybody. But his administration, Betsy DeVos, for example, had said, had written language that made it, that excluded undocumented students, documented students, all of that into that. So then that puts the universities then in a position to enforce this exclusion,
Mhm.
um, unless they find another way of doing it. So, with donations and stuff like that, we were able to do something more than before. But it's not to the extent that it was. So that was a big challenge, and one that's really, that's um something that I've heard about, and that like that I see, how this exclusion happens. Now with this next round of funding that's coming through the Rescue Act, um, from what I'm seeing, that exclusion has been removed. So I'm
Mhm.
glad to see that our like our students are going to see some relief through that, even though it's not that it's too late, but kind of, because there's still like this need. um
There was a need
but
before,
but there, yeah, this
before
is what I'm saying.
COVID.
There
Yeah.
was a need. There
Right.
was a need before. It's just like it's gonna come like at the end, like in the fall. I
Mhm.
mean, again, doesn't mean that there isn't still need there, for this, but just that, like, you know during when they needed it, when people needed it most, and there was like
Right.
sacrifices that are always made, um
Mhm.
for, in segregated ways, right? They only, some
Right.
some people sacrifice and had to sacrifice suggests, I was reading this too, sometimes sacrifice suggests is like, this is something that I'm doing, to for my family or for, no, it's
Mhm.
like, this is something that wasn't, what is it, what's the word when you're being forced to sacrifice, right?
Right.
It's not the same. So that's one of the
Exactly.
the big things that's happened. Another is, obviously, who is more likely to get COVID, who can
Mhm.
get, because even though the shots and all that kind of stuff, that part is free, but if you get sick, treatment isn't free. So like
Correct.
the like, in general, and then specifically with this, the who can get off from work to get a test, all of these types of things are issues. And even how to
Mm.
get, um where to get like assistance and how to coordinate that. When we
Right.
get off the recording, there's something I want to update you on that.
Mhm.
Um but yeah, so like part of this is finding ways that aren't, are finding ways, let me just put it at that.
Right. And just one of the things I want to point out about the Center for Undocumented Students is that, being undocumented, there are other identities that you also carry. And I think TCUS has done a good job at trying to create a space where we feel validated. Um, because, if you're undocumented, you know, it's not uncommon for you to be working class. And so then we have the class issue that was exacerbated during COVID-19 because it's either you put your health on the line, your life on the line to go to work. But if you don't go to work, right, to protect your health, if you have a family, who's going to put food on the table, right? Who's going to clothe your children, So when it comes to being undocumented, you're thinking about class, you're thinking about how do people perceive you, right? Gender, sexual orientation, I think with that, those kinds of conversations, we're able to exist as who we are at TCUS. In TCUS, is able to provide, also understanding. We're able to also just explore how all of these things intersect. Um, and again, just during COVID, right? Poverty, impoverishment, really comes, and being undocumented, right, are two different, well, I call them traumas, but really the fact that we could not, undocumented students couldn't even receive some sort of aid during this time, and we have to rely on mutual aid or donations instead of, given something that, I think we deserve. I don't know, we have a right to. It's just a lot of it, a big part of the conversation was what kind of emotional scars COVID-19 left on undocumented people and undocumented young people who are in college. And I'm assuming that after, as the school reopens, these conversations, must continue, because it'll, young people are starved from that connection. And then maybe TCUS could offer a space, okay, let's talk about what just happened. Because we need to talk about what just happened. Healing is a very integral part of TCUS, which is I think is amazing. And I just wanted to include that in there to,
put that on record. No, gotcha.
Yeah.
Because yes, I was gonna add that,
from a student perspective, how we are receiving and experiencing the Center for Undocumented Students, how do we perceive it? That's kind of how we see it, just for the record.
Thank you. No, that's good. That means that our collective efforts are working as they should, because it's about there's the informational part, there's the resource connection, but there's also joy, and there's also healing. So our healing circles, and big shout out to Margarita, who has given up her time and to facilitate these. One of the things that was hard about,
Oh, she's a counselor.
She's the counselor.
Yeah.
Who facilitates the healing circles. I think one of the things that was hard this year was that we didn't have the physical space. Because when we have the physical space, we can come together, we share a meal, we do other healing things together.
Food is also another integral part of TCUS.
Food is, and that is definitely a reflection of me, because I like to eat.
Yeah, that's one of our tools of community building.
I'm gonna use that. It's not that I like to eat, it's that it's a community building tool. All right, I'm using it. So that's something that we were missing this year, but we were still connecting through this, Zoom and all this kind of stuff, to do healing circles, to do workshops, and in collaboration with Raiz, for example, to do game nights. And just one of the things that the team brings us back to, is that we need to share moments of joy that were more than just our pain, and the ways in which the systems and structures are oppressing us, right? What are our moments of joy and celebration?
Celebrate wins.
Celebrating wins.
Yes.
Even though they're complicated, it's important to have the celebration. Even though that there's but even there's we won, but we still have to do X, Y, and Z. That is always going to be the case. It's important to celebrate the wins for our own care, and that's how we show care for each other, through that, these other things that we do, our small celebration next week around that. These are just moments to have together in that.
Mhm.
So
Well, that was absolutely amazing. You covered 20 years
20 years. And
at
that's
St.
I held
Peter's.
back too.
Yes, every single, I think you can have an oral history for every single year.
Yeah.
Like you can go for hours because really I think we've seen a lot, and we just started the 21st century. And already, because what happened in the past builds up, builds up and builds up. And as you were going through just all of these tragedies, there's a pattern and we're never given a break.
Mhm.
So
But just as there's a pattern of tragedies, there's a pattern of resistance.
that's true.
So that's it's I don't know. To me, I need to end on hope,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Like,
And you do that, when I'm a part of TCUS. I'm a part of the TCUS team.
mhm.
And um,
I know. I don't want
you
you to go yet.
I don't want to go either. And you give me that part-time. Edit this out, Lauren.
Yes.
But you always remind me, I think, Dr. Ayala, you always remind us that of that, but oh my God, like you can't like, it's so easy to be sad about everything, and there's a reason why, but then you remind us, but let's look at this, but remember this, and how when there's tragedy, there's always resistance, there's always a response from the community, and that opens up conversation to people who were not aware. That opens up, educating, unlearning, and relearning, and you know it's just amazing. And I'm glad that we were able to cover that in today's interview, and be a part of that St. Peter's history, as it should, because the mission of the Jesuits involves social justice, and this is something definitely in tune with what the university believes in. And I'm
And
glad. Mhm.
I was going to say, and speaking of other changes in the university, I know of one that happened this year. Perhaps you're familiar with it, the name change. What's the new, the St. Peter's Tribune
Oh
moving.
yes,
So
yes.
that needs to be like also, because that's like a big deal that originated from like student organizing. Yet there was like definitely faculty and others who over the years have like tried to, like, but like it didn't happen until student organizing. Same with CBP. Student organizing
Mhm,
made these things happen. And so when we see
mhm.
this in particular with the name change of the newspaper, you see the power of student
Right.
resistance, of efforts like
Mhm.
that, and what it can yield. And like the new norm will be the new name of the school newspaper. It is the St. Peter's Tribune, right? I forgot now.
Yes, yes.
Just,
And for the
I'm saying how
commencement,
important it is.
there's an award for the
Uh-huh.
newspaper. It says the St. Peter's Tribune Award.
Love it. See,
Yes,
and
yes, it's
that's,
already in use.
yes. So
Yeah.
you already see
So,
that, like, and we don't always see that. Like, when I think of like the students who were organizing before and didn't get to see the fruit of their labor, you got to see the fruit of your labor, yes, within the last like year that you're here, but like you got to see it. You got to be here for it.
right.
And that's an amazing thing.
Yeah. Oh, I was a part of those efforts.
Yeah,
For those that aren't
that's what I
aware.
say, you.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Oh, part of my introduction, I'm also a student organizer.
You
Yeah.
forgot to mention
I
that.
forgot. I forgot to mention, and we also didn't cover the change from St. Peter's College to St. Peter's University.
Yeah, that was a whole other thing, but that happened too.
It
This is
happened. Let's
like,
focus.
yeah,
Yeah,
that happened.
but the students have really done wonderful things during your time here, and I'm so honored
Yes.
to have been able to continue in that tradition. I always think about my ancestors, what the women in my family generations ago have done. My family is full of organizers. I remember back to my grandmother, in socialist movement in Peru. I remember I told she came here to visit, and she fought for like food for the poor. It was like las algo de leche, leche y, like in her community, right? Um, and I told her, oh, like my mom works for a nonprofit for Make the Road New Jersey, and they were gonna do like a protest, right, in Trenton. And so then we told her, hey, like you should go, right? And she was like, no, look, okay, but we need to prepare like the water and the lemon or whatever in case like they spray us. I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, no, because aren't they gonna spray us? Like we have to go with our rags and everything. I'm like, no, it's not like that. But just the fact that she knows, she was a part of that, radical wave. And I'm sure many of my people, many of the women have done that so long ago, and I'm continuing that tradition. But also on campus, also I did that. I was able to contribute, right, to the many wonderful efforts that students have done over the past, in our case, over the past 20 years. I contributed to changes on campus involving undocumented students. And I'm sure that students are going to continue to do that. And I can't wait to see, what they do. And you're going to be there, hopefully you decide to stay at St. Peter's, and you're just going to see them, do all these things. And, that's completely amazing. Keep me on the email list. And also we need to celebrate those wins for CBP and the St. Peter's Tribune. So I'm excited for the food.
Yes.
Yes. I think we deserve a little party.
Yes, this is true. And I think in well, as a separate thing, but I think in the fall maybe there is like some other more formal recognition, because there's been some online stuff around that, but maybe there's like an event that we do that recognizes this. So just as you're part of that long line, you are gonna be like an ancestor, right? But even as we like look to ancestors for inspiration, for spirit, for all of this, that there's ways you contribute now, not just to those who come next, but those who came before you. So like it's always like in conversation. So I think these are good things, and I'm honored to be part of this, the small part that I'm in, because I think it's more important to recognize the collective efforts rather than like individual things.
Of course.
So I see TCUS as a collective kind of entity, always with students from the beginning, always with like students alongside, and that's a tradition that I want to continue, and with a strong alumni base, which you are now.
I am. Yeah, TCUS has been a wonderful space for me. It was a wonderful home. And for a societal issue that we were both a part of, there was a mass shooting about 2 years ago in Jersey City. And the first place I went to was a social justice house, TCUS. Like, I ain't gotta go. It is my safe house. Like, I need to be there. So it's just been a really wonderful, 2 years, like when I became involved with TCUS, but it's just been really wonderful. And I have learned so much. And I hope that I can continue to always, in my alumni role, to be involved. But if you want to create that little part-time position up in the TCUS, Lord.
Sure. So if any funders are listening to this.
If funders are listening. Yes.
I would love to set up a part-time. It would be great.
If you have a little bit of cash, we will name it after you.
We'll have that. That would be great. I mean, ideally in the future, what should happen is that like a TCUS student should be like the director of TCUS. That's like what I would like to see for the future. And I would like be a counselor or something something within that, or one of the support things. But I think you know, we need a TCUS, maybe alum to run it
Of
one
course,
day.
of course.
So
Well, this was,
now it's 4:18.
it is 4:18. Enough. um, this has been amazing, Dr. Ayala. This was a wonderful conversation. I hope that you also had a good time. And yeah, is there anything you'd like to conclude with?
Yeah, thanks for being the one to interview me. So
Yeah, I'm glad you
that
were.
that
It was comfortable. It wasn't too awkward.
mm-hmm.
Aside from the
Yeah.
lagging.
Do you want to stop the recording?
No, we'll stop the recording, but that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ayala.
All right.
And I will stop recording right
Thank you.
now.